Divine Bonfleet here, and this is the third episode of our teaching, Antidote to Chaos, a pathway to abundant life. Antidote to Chaos, a pathway to a good life. And I hope that you did read Deuteronomy 28 like I recommended, and you did the exercise where you replaced blessings as the natural consequence for order and curses, the curses there as the natural or automatic consequence for chaos. So I hope you did that exercise. There was something I said in the series that preceded this one, the blueprints to redemption and transcendence. I mentioned that in times of when things are relatively fine, when there is no collective chaos in the environment or individual chaos, you can get by with a degree of ignorance or even wrong knowledge and assumptions about how the world works. But as the nature of reality, problems are bound to happen. Chaos is bound to try to creep in. And in times of chaos, when things get bad, you ignorance and wrong assumptions about how the world works can be very costly and destructive. And I gave an example of a cell phone. I want to give you another example this time just to make the subject clearer. You could have a car, you could buy a new car, and the only thing you know about a car is you turn on the ignition and say it's an automatic car, so you just shift gears and you press on the accelerator and things just work. And that's all you know about the car, and you probably know how to read the meter to know when to put fuel and maybe when to change the oil, and that is all. And let's say your car breaks down, you can get by very well with your car and you never have any problem. And you can meet a guy struggling to understand basic maintenance about a car, and you can tell him, oh, that is a total waste of time. What do you need that knowledge for? You can get by with just this basic understanding. You don't need to sweat and to pursue wisdom, to pursue understanding of how the world works. But you're going to understand the consequence. You're going to come face to face with the consequence of that kind of hubris when your car breaks down in the middle of no man's land. And let's say your tire even punctures and you don't even know the basic maintenance of changing the tire. Or let's say the car breaks down in the middle of no man's land in the night and you don't even know the basic maintenance. Maybe it was just something simple that you just have to jiggle something and then the car comes back to life and you go on your journey. But since you know virtually nothing, in that moment of little chaos, your ignorance can be costly. You might have to call a mechanic or you might got to call someone. You know all that. So ignorance is costly in times of chaos, in times of problems. You can get by when everything is fine. And so in life, we have to, scripture says that wisdom is the principal thing. Get wisdom, we it get understanding. It's more precious than silver and gold. Now, but the question is what exactly to know, because there are people who know a lot of things and they know a lot of junk things, things that are not important, things that are not necessary. And in the world of media, when knowledge keeps bombarding us from every side, people are pumping knowledge at us, requesting our attention, and whether through the television, the YouTube, and social media, you have to be able to curate, to discipline your focus and your attention, and to understand the things that are really worth investing your time to learning, to understanding. Otherwise, you will just be learning all these things and your head will swell up with knowledge, but you will not have the productive consequence, a positive consequence as a result of the many things you've learned, because you've learned a whole lot of junk. It's like eating knowledge junk food. It swells your stomach and make you feel content, makes you feel like you're wise, like you're informed. But whereas all that information that is swelling inside you, that you have at the command of your fingertips, is useless. So what is it that one has to know? I may pose it for you now that the important thing to know as far as knowledge is concerned, is to understand the fundamental permanent or permanent principles of life. And there are two kinds of permanent principles. Now I'm building this lecture, this teaching, on what we discussed last week, and when I spoke about scriptures, and what the role that scripture is to us is not the role that science is to us, that the knowledge of scripture and science, those two do not serve the same master. And I said in Blueprints to Transcendence about I said that too in Blueprints to Transcendence and Redemption, and I promised that we were going to get deeper into that in this teaching session. Okay, so by the way, before I continue, I want to thank all of you who took time in the previous episode to get back to me and give me feedback about the things you learned, about how it helped you, and about how it opened your mind to think, and it really opened your mind to new territories of knowledge and understanding. I want to thank you for getting back to me with your feedback, your gratitude, your words of encouragement and praises. And then also, I want to thank you for getting the word out, for sharing the teachings. Last time I was not so optimistic about the numbers, but now I'm really excited about the numbers. The numbers are beginning to match and reflect the amazing, incredible numbers we have for Blueprints to Transcendence. I actually talking with someone not so long ago, and I said I don't know what happened. It's just like a bubble, or something burst open, and that lecture, that teaching just exploded, and the downloads were just soaring. I mean, and everywhere. So I don't know what happened. I didn't do anything so different from what I've been doing with previous teachings, but that particular teaching really exploded, to my great encouragement and joy. And I wasn't so optimistic about the numbers of this one last time we spoke, but now, oh, good God, the numbers are beginning to reflect. Now, no, it's not just about numbers, It's not like it's not vanity here, and I'm not just being vain, celebrating the increase of the numbers. It's like a feedback loop to me, that it tells me that people are finding value in this thing, and I find encouragement in that. I find more optimism, and should I say optimism and encouragement to do this from that. So I want to thank those of you who are sharing your teaching, who are sharing with your friends that you think will find value in the teaching. So God bless you. You're doing great work. We are in this together. All right. Uh, so let's continue. So I was saying that what to know is to understand the permanent principles of life, and there are spiritual permanent principles and there are physical permanent principles. I'll give you and understanding these fundamental or these permanent principles, it's one of the key ways to defeat chaos. To understand, because to understand how the world works, I mentioned previously in the previous episode, in the previous teaching last week, that there are very few ways to build a civilization, to build a bridge that does what the bridge is supposed to do. There are very few ways to build a successful family, a successful life, in the real terms of success. And I'm going to talk about what success means in real terms. There are very few ways to do that, and there are many ways to build a bridge that will collapse in no time, and that maybe that will not do what the bridge is supposed to do, at least for a time that is considerably required for that bridge, or so on. And the same thing with our lives. There are very few ways to build a fulfilling, a meaningful life, and that has to do with understanding the permanent principles of how the world works, because human nature has not changed. And I know there are people that likes to believe that human nature has changed. The details about life on earth has changed in many ways, but human nature, for as long as we can tell, for as long as we know the history of human beings, human nature has not changed. Humans want the same thing that they have always wanted since the dawn of humans on this planet. The same things that made humans happy thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago still are the things that will make humans happy. The same things that made humans miserable still are the things that will make humans miserable today and now. Human nature has not changed. This is very important. I think you should write this down somewhere and you underline it. Human nature has not changed since the dawn of time. Human nature has not changed. It's been the same. Write that down. That's a very powerful statement. The implications are tremendous. Anyway, let's continue. So understanding the permanent principles of life is one of the ways to defeat chaos in your life. Now, what are some of the permanent principles? Because you see, uh, when you understand a permanent principle, when you understand them, you can apply them in many different ways, in many different kinds of to solve many different kinds of one permanent principle can be applied in so many different ways to solve so many different kinds of perplexing problems, to to explain uh, perplexing paradoxes and dilemmas and so on. One permanent principle can do that. For instance, now I could tell you, let me give you a permanent principle, a 30-word permanent principle, which is that I could tell you that if you place anything into a fluid, the fluid like liquid or air, and if that thing weighs less than the weight of that fluid which you're some placing that thing into, uh, that thing will float. Otherwise, the thing will sink. If I'll say it again, if you place something in the fluid, if that thing weighs less than the fluid that you're placing it into, that thing will float. If it weighs more than the fluid that you're placing it into, the thing will sink. Now, that is a permanent principle, a physical permanent principle of life. That simple principle explains so many things. It is useful in so many different areas of life, and it helps solve problems in so many different aspects of life. So one permanent principle can explain and answer so many different questions about so many different things. And it applies to physical permanent principle like this one, as well as to spiritual permanent principle. Now, before we get to the spiritual permanent principles, which is what I want us to discuss, because they are those permanent principles that are the fundamentals to what it is to have order or blessing in our lives, and to overcome chaos and send the curse out of our lives. Uh, it is interesting to me that the have you ever watched this movie Aladdin? Aladdin, that he made the genie, and the genie asks the genie the bottle and asks Aladdin for 3 wishes. It's interesting to me that why 3 wishes, and in life they are just because to build a bridge, most bridges don't look the same, but there are at least 2 or 3 fundamental principles that no matter where the bridge is being built, who is building the bridge has to observe those few fundamental principles. Then you can play around with the rest. You can play around with the look, the beauty, and the design, but you have to have the foundation set on those principles, on those fundamental principles. And the same thing with life, that there are very few things that if you get them right, then everything else in your life will take shape, and you will have a great life, and you will live a life that by the time you be leaving this world, you would be living with a smile, and that you live well, you live the good life, in the true sense of it. Now I'll give you various practical applications of that 30-word permanent principle I just mentioned. I'll give you several applications. For example, that permanent principle can explain why. Have you ever been to a party and then there are these mystical balloons, and they will appear mystical to you if you don't understand what is going on? That when they release the balloons, it just keeps flying to the air, and sometimes it flies and disappears in the atmosphere. I mean, it's amazing balloons. What actually is happening is that often those are helium balloons. The air inside is helium. And since helium is lighter than the air in the atmosphere, you remember the principle. If you put an object, you put something into a fluid, whatever it is, if it is lighter than the fluid, it will float. It's like have you ever taken something like maybe say a ball, a plastic ball, and you submerge it, you press it to the bottom of the water in a bucket, and then when you remove your hand, it just floats back to the top. And that's what a helium balloon is trying to do. It's floating in the atmosphere. Is filled with air, which is fluid, and so helium is light, and so it floats, and that's why the balloon goes up. So that permanent principle explains that. You see, so it also explains why airships fly. Airships are like huge helium balloons, except in the original airships that were filled with hydrogen. That's the same principle. Now, that permanent principle can also explain, let's say that an Airbus has just crash land on an ocean, and they have brought a group of teams and people, emergency rescue, and they want to just kind of calculate how many people might be able to get out before the plane, the Airbus airliner, actually submerges under the ocean and sinks to the bottom of the ocean. And they want to do all those calculations and calculate the odds, or maybe even at the level of manufacture and development, and they want to know that if this Airbus airliner has to crash land on an ocean, how long would it stay. They want to make sure that it can stay on water for a good amount of time for everyone to come out before it sinks. And so how would they get to know how to do that? That permanent principle about the weight and the mass of the water body which it will land on, they can now determine how to build the aircraft in a way that it will float for an amount of time that a good number of people will be able to come out before it sinks, only from that permanent principle, you see. And so there's also, it also applies in another, we could also apply that permanent principle in another sector, in the cooking, in the kitchen. It explains why oil floats on water. And if you understand that oil floats on water, and you're a chef, it's going to help you to word your recipes better. Because have you, many of you have ever tried to cook and the food came out a total disaster, oil just floating in patches, and especially if you use palm oil and you don't do the job well, you see palm oil just floating around the food in a kind of careless, very untasteful way. And so they could word a recipe and really explain to you how you can blend that stuff in a way that the oil really blends into the sauce and doesn't float on the sauce or the water in the sauce. And so this principle could also apply in the field of people who make surfboards which are used to surf in the oceans, to make surfboards that will float in a certain way that will not sink. You could have that same permanent principle applies there. It is also useful in the medical world, that permanent principle. It explains a medical emergency or a health emergency which happens as a consequence of an air bubble forming and traveling in a person's blood vessel. And it can actually, it is what is known as arterial air embolism. That could be very catastrophic. It could even be deadly. It's happened to me once, many years ago in a hospital. I didn't know what it was at the time, but I knew that it almost killed me. The nurse put the drip in my hand, and there were air bubbles, and the air bubbles got in my vein, and it got to my heart, and it's a very catastrophic time for me. I I don't want to waste your time here trying to explain what happened, but you see that principle, that permanent principle I just explained to you, applies in this interesting field of medicine, in the phenomenon known as arterial air embolism. Now, then, here's an interesting one. Let's say I take a block of lead, like the size of, say, a tennis ball, and I drop it into a bowl of water, and I let you watch. You're gonna watch how that block of lead, like the size of a tennis ball, plummets to the and sinks to the bottom of that bowl. Now, say again that I take that block of lead, the size of a tennis ball, and I warm it to become malleable, and I hammer it into the shape of a saucer, and then I drop it into that same bowl. Amazingly, it's gonna float. Now I haven't reduced anything. It's exactly the same weight, this exactly the same uh, a block of lead, but I've just changed the shape and hammered it to be like a saucer, a flat and light like a saucer, and I drop it and it floats. Amazing, right? It seems like the the principle is being not acting the way it should. And now this is important because when I start talking about spiritual permanent principles, some of you might get back to me and say, but no, no, no. And you start telling me about all these exceptions to as a way to dismiss that this is not a permanent principle, and so on. And that would not be such a smart thing to do, because even this phenomenon I just explained with the lead, there's an explanation for it why it happens, and it's a very interesting one. Anyway, so let's push this thing a bit further. We are already 20 minutes. I hope I should be able to bring this baby to landing before the this lecture comes to an end. And it's a lot I have planned to say today, and I hope I should be able to develop this concept. I'm still developing the concept, and we're 20 minutes far into it. So there are many ways, there are many other life's principles and experiences that can be fully explained with that 30-word permanent principle about placing objects in the fluids. And that is only a physical permanent principle. There are so many other physical permanent principles, and if you want to know them, and it's important you know them, but not as important as knowing spiritual permanent principles. You have to study physics and chemistry. Yeah, physics and chemistry will do, and that will get your arms around a whole bunch of permanent principles, physical permanent principles about how the world works. Uh, but there are also spiritual permanent principles, and sometimes they now normally in the ancient world you would learn spiritual permanent principles from ancient source of wisdom like through religion. You learn it from your rabbi or from your pastor, a wise pastor. Quite many pastors today are not wise anyway, but you learn it from your wise pastor, a wise rabbi, a wise sage or teacher of religion, and that's where you will get this wisdom. But the academic world, and trying to bleach and and bleach out God and banish God from the world, God, religion, the soul, and the spiritual dimension from the world, have adopted the spiritual permanent principles and have rebranded them and introduced them into academia in the tracksuit of subjects like sociology, psychology, gender studies. All those subjects in university they call studies. Let me give you a piece of advice, unsolicited advice, if you may. You could take it or leave it, because you didn't ask for my advice on the subject. But if you want to send your child to the university or to any school, you would be wise to stay away from anything that has studies at the end of it. Don't send your child to study any course in the university that has studies at the end of it. That is a waste of your time and your money. Studies like gender studies, race studies, uh, all those studies, those courses in the university. Don't have your child do that. It's a waste of your money and resources. Anyway, so that is what happens, that the academia has adopted this world of spiritual permanent principles and have brought it into academia under this subject, sociology, psychology, and so on. And most of them, not all of them, there are some that are wise to recognize the garden from which that flower was plucked, and recognize that this flower will only survive if it stays connected to its roots. But most of them are trying to explain the spiritual permanent principles in a way that completely bleaches out God or any mention of the spiritual dimension. And as a result of that, as these professors and pundits and and so-called bright, brilliant people and leaders of thought, as a result of their rejection of the spiritual and of God, but yet trying to explain these principles, they end up arriving so many bizarre conclusions and distorted ideas that any intellectually honest person will look at it and be bamboozled at the degree of twistedness and crookedness in their pontification or their expression of those ideas. So we can discuss very real, practical, applicable spiritual permanent principles that has to do with maybe male female relationships, that has to do with instinctive human behaviors, that has to do with making money. Money is spiritual for the most part, and and there is a coral. No, let me not say this now. I'll just open a can of worms. Maybe I'll say this later. And we could discuss permanent principles on how to achieve your purpose, to find meaning and happiness in life, to live a life that is maximally satisfying and fulfilling. There are permanent spiritual principles around that. Now, I have already loaded the word permanent principles with meaning from what I've just done, from all the explanation I've just done for the past 20 minutes on the 30 word permanent principles. So I now hope and know that you understand my usage of that word and the content, the meat around it. And so all the spiritual permanent principles that we might discuss, having to do with the very little few areas of your life, relationships, your productive ability, uh, and like I said, it's interesting to me that the Guinea in Al-Ahdi in Ole grants three wishes. If you understand permanent principles about three things, I guarantee you, I bet my money on it and everything on it. If you understand permanent principles, spiritual permanent principles about male female relationships, about productiveness, creativity or productiveness, or to be very specific, money, how money works. When I say how money works, it's how to make it, how to keep it, and how to use it, and how to transfer it through generations of your lineage. And if you understand permanent principles about the reality of good and evil, to know the difference between good and evil, a lot of people do not know the difference between good and evil. I'm telling you, it's not as simple as it sounds. Good and evil is not so black and white. Now, we will talk about this. Now, if you understand the permanent principles around these three things, permanent spiritual principles about these three things, I guarantee you, if you act out that understanding, you would have a good life. You will defeat chaos in every area of your life, and you will live a life that is maximally satisfying, that is full of adventure, that is full of energy and hope, that no matter the challenges, the storms that may come at you and try to sink you and try to put you under and try to make your life bring you into despair, you would thrive. You would live a life of joy and meaning, and you will overcome. And even in dark times, you will still have meaning and clarity in life. You see, so we could discuss the permanent principles around those three things, and that will be fascinating for you to know them, because as soon as you begin to know them and understand them, all of a sudden things that appeared baffling, things that you sometimes looked at and scratched your head and wondered, why does this happen? And really wondered about it. Well, all of a sudden, you would now have the tools, which I'm going to give you the tools throughout these teachings, to understand these things, to explain them at least for yourself and for your children and anyone that may care to listen to the explanation that you have for why those things are happening and what could be done to prevent them in the first place, or to deal with it after the fact. Now, so exactly the same way that a physical permanent principle, like about putting object in a fluid, explains airships, blood embolism, and all kinds of even culinary kitchen phenomena, your amateur cook might be mystified why the oil is not blending. I mean, you could cook a really brilliant soup with everything so blend in uniform, and then you hand the recipe to the next person, and the person cooks the same thing with the same recipe, with the same ingredients. I mean, the same ingredients, the same recipe, but their own soup comes out is not blend. The oil is just patchy. They're like islands, and you could see that because the person did not grasp that permanent principle and how the blend is made, right? So that one permanent principle, just as that physical permanent principle explains and solves problems in a wide area of things. And I've mentioned spiritual permanent principle does this also, that by understanding the spiritual principle, permanent principle in at least these three areas, and if you want to raise your child, if you're raising kids, you want them to understand the spiritual permanent principles in these three areas of life: male female relationships, how money works. This is money is very important, and I'm not necessarily saying them in their order of priority. I think all of them has the same priority. They are all the same. No one is more important than the other. It's like having 2 feet. You need your 2 feet. And if somebody would ask me that, hey Bonfley, would you rather lose your left foot or your right foot? And I say no, I would rather have both. Okay, so you rather understand these three things, and then third, you want to understand the difference or the reality of good and evil. You want to know that good and evil exist, and then you want to understand the difference between them. You don't want to come to that woke state where you don't either think evil exists, or you come to that confused state where you don't know what evil really is, where you honestly call evil good because it looks good. It takes a degree of wisdom and sophisticatedness in spiritual things to really know the difference between good and evil. And it cracks me all the time because often I have to deal with people that I'll look at something and say that is evil, and and to them it's good, it's virtuous, it's noble. I look at it and say that's evil, and it's really evil. And the more I look at it, I could see the depth, the degree of darkness and evil in it. And it cracks me when I stand around people who cannot see that this thing is evil and do not understand that it's evil. And then, or sometimes I meet someone that is doing something really good and I'm really excited about it and happy about it, but people around them are around that person are shooting stones at him and saying he's evil, and they don't understand that what he's doing is good. And and if you look at a lot of what is going on in the world today, especially in the world of politics, there is this misunderstanding or polarization about what good and evil really is. And scripture says, if you do not know good and evil, if you don't have that training, you will find yourself on a path. The very likely tendency is that you will choose evil, because evil is sweet, evil is beautiful, evil is wonderful, evil is not ugly. Satan is not ugly pitchfork horrible creature that you see and you run. It's beautiful. Evil is beautiful, is sweet. It comes with a promise to grant you everything you ever want, when you want it, how you want it. It comes with the promise of unlimited pleasure and self-fulfillment and self-gratification and instant gratification. It's how beautiful and lovely evil is. And scripture says if you don't have the training, you will find a way that seems right, that seems virtuous, that seems wonderful. But the only time you realize that you have engaged on the fool's errand is at the end. It says at the end is destruction. There's the word for fool, and I have a whole study on that, on the Hebrew words for fool. There's a type of fool that will only learn. It says there's a fool that will only learn with beatings on the back, through the rod, lashes. In other words, there's a degree of foolishness when you have become so contorted, so twisted in your mind that you do not really know the difference between good and evil. The only way your eyes will open, the only way you will learn is when you hit bottom and when you meet the consequences of your folly, of that tragic error of not being able to discern truly what good and evil is. And unfortunately, if you have children, they might pay the price because you will not be able to inculcate in them the values of what is truly good from what is truly evil, and they will plunge on a liberal path, on a progressive path of life that would, and I will talk about this a little bit later about what a liberal path is, the serpent's path, the path of eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And I mentioned that a lot of us, we condemn Adam and Eve for eating the damn fruit, but yet the way we live our lives everywhere, we are making choices that are by implication choosing to eat from the damn tree. And so we cannot blame Adam for the chaos. We are part of the chaos. Before you scream at the world, you might want to make sure that you're not part of the problem of the world. And you might want to start with yourself and fixing the man in the mirror. Okay. So, and I mentioned that the secular academia world, and this is a real thing. I started seeing this shift and it almost ruined my life. Thank God it saved me. From high school, I look back now in hindsight and I see the indoctrination of, and one might think it's a conspiracy. One might think that my high school teachers and then my university teachers all conspired and sat in a meeting and decided that we're going to brainwash everyone that passes through our institution. So I'm going to talk about this in detail a little bit. And a lot of you might not have seen the evil in what was happening. And I look at it in hindsight and I see the darkness. I really see the darkness and it's scary. And I could see the result of what is happening in the kids that are coming out from the institutions nowadays worse than it was when I was there back then 10 years ago or more. Okay, so as I said, the secular academia has been trying to find a way to explain everything in the world without God, and that has been the goal, to come up with a godless explanation for all reality, and this, as a result of that, a priori determination and bias, they come up with a lot of bizarre conclusions about permanent principles of the world, permanent spiritual principles, recommendations, pop star recommendations about what will make you happy. And there's a study that has really, that has proven that the prescriptions of the whole feminist movement for women, what they think will make women happy and fulfilling, and the study has shown that has rather made many women more miserable and unhappy than that movement thought it was going to achieve. And so we have all these pop star recommendations, celebrity recommendations, expert recommendations about what should be your priority in life, how you should organize your hierarchy of values, your hierarchy of morality, what should be more important for you as a man, what should be important for you as a woman, what should be at the top of your hierarchy of values, and for the same thing. And and in the secular world, I read something not so long ago about a lady said that her, was it her cousin that decided to put her career on a down low so she could have a family and have children, and she spoke how she looked at her condescendingly, like she was being primitive and backward to make that kind of foolish decision. And so you see the hierarchy of values of the world, that as a female, there's a lot of talk about equalizing things between, well, I'm beginning to get out of track here. So you see all these recommendations that the professors that is coming out from the academia, all these people that come out from your Ivy League universities, and then they're streaming in this information to their YouTube channels, and we have them, a lot of them. I don't want to mention their names, and they have become sources of inspiration to hundreds and thousands of millions of people, recommending from people what should be important. And we have the bloggers online and YouTubers and all those things. Now, if you do not understand the permanent principles of life, and if you do not really understand, if you have not had reasons to come to agree with me when I say that human nature has not changed over the past 6,000 years or 5,000 years of human history, uh, then you might want to really investigate the subject for yourself. Okay, so there's a reason why the Bible says that the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. You can find that in Psalms 111, the very last verse. And interesting enough, in the Hebrew, if you read that verse in the Hebrew, the word for fear is the same word as seen in Hebrew. And if you think of it, it makes a lot of sense because uh, it makes a lot of sense. It seems pretty obvious why that is the case. You see, why it is seeing God, the seeing of God is the beginning of the beginning of wisdom is the seeing of God. It says, now I'm trying to really make that clear to you. It says, what that verse is really saying. It is really saying, what is really saying is that the beginning of all wisdom is seeing God. In other words, what that means practically is that understanding how the world works so clearly, that you actually understand how the world works so clearly, that God's presence is no longer a matter of belief, blind faith, blind mystical faith. I don't have a reason to believe it. I just believe it. That kind of belief. No, you understand how the world works so clearly that believing God, that the presence of God in the world, the reality of God is not a matter of belief, but it's a matter of observation. That is, you understand. This is by faith we understand. By practice, by trying to do these things, these recommendations of Scripture, you come to that understanding, that realization. So it's now a matter of observation, and that's why I said in the previous lecture, the previous teaching, that when I say boldly that Scripture is one of the most reliable source of spiritual wisdom, one of the most sure antidote to chaos, one of the most trustworthy blueprint to redemption and transcendence, as I explained what my idea of redemption and transcendence is in that lecture. If you haven't listened to that lecture, you want to listen to that 7-part episode, that 7-episode series, Blueprint to Redemption and Transcendence. Now, so now, when I said boldly, I said I do not say that because I think that the Bible is from God, therefore it must be true, therefore it must be useful, therefore it must be good. No, that's not how I made those conclusions. I made them by observation, by studying it, by observing the world, by looking at things out there. Let me put it this way. Let me put it this way. In the same way that if you study, say, physics and chemistry, in chemistry, and you study all these things about how the world works, the atmosphere, the climate, you can tell someone that the sun is going to be up tomorrow at 9 a.m. And the person could look at you and say, "Oh, Dr. Pamphlet, I admire your faith and your belief." And I'm going to tell the person, look, it has nothing to do with faith and belief. It's not a matter of faith and belief that I'm able to say that the sun is going to rise tomorrow. So when I speak of belief at 9 a.m. tomorrow, when I speak of believing God, when I speak of my value of Scripture, when I go out to teach the Bible, I don't do it like a fanatic or a blind believer, a blind faith believer would do, who simply has embraced the proposition that the Bible is God's book, therefore it is worth talking about, therefore it is worth teaching it to others, therefore it must be true, therefore it must be right. And when you've made those a priori assumptions and taken them as absolute ultimate truth. And then when you get into the investigation of the Bible, you already have that bias, which might be okay though, and so you're no longer objective. And well, that's a whole subject of its own, isn't it? And so let's leave that alone. So to the person that says that they admire my faith and my belief when I tell them that the sun, based on my understanding of physics and chemistry, that the sun will rise up around here tomorrow at 9 a.m., I would respond to the person that it has nothing to do with faith and belief, that it has more to do with enough scientific evidence, scientific knowledge about physical, the permanent principles of the world. And when you understand a lot of physical permanent principles of the world, it becomes very easy to understand and predict physical phenomena. The same way, if you understand spiritual permanent principles, you can predict someone's future, you can predict consequences of actions. And that is why people come to me for advice all the time. And giving advice is not one of my forte. It's not one of the things I like doing, because there's an authority. There's, who am I to tell you what to do with your life? That's the thing that makes me really uncomfortable. But yet I and now unless I look at it from the point of view that look, I have been given a tremendous privilege, a tremendous burden has been laid on me. Another human being has trusted me with a burden so incredible, and a responsibility that I cannot think of any other responsibility that is more than that, and has come to me and said to help them understand what they need to do with their lives. It's an honor that brings me to tears sometimes, and I never take it lightly. I never feel myself in that position as being superior to that, or being, looking at it from a high-handed position. It's something I take with a lot of humility. It's because I feel like I'm doing the work of God. It's like, let me put it this way, like it's like, let's say you're an elder sibling. How many of you are elder siblings at your home? And then your parents are old, and then now there are certain things that you now have to do in the role of a parent, and so they come to you, and to they come to you as an elder sibling, and now you have to play mother or father. And so that's a tremendous responsibility, to be in the seat of your father or your mother. And so when people come to me for advice, when people come to me for wisdom, to understand what they should do with their lives, to help me, to have me help them turn on the lights, so they can at least see the path in front of them, and at least know where they are going, and what will before them on that path. I think that God has given me that privilege to sit on his seat and be what he is to his children, in the sense of action, to be God's mind and God's mouth to that person. It's a privilege of tremendous weight and honor. And so when someone tells me, puts me in that position, I make sure I want to give them the best of advice that I know that is not a responsibility to be taken lightly. And how it is that I am able to do this job, a job that I take very seriously, uh, very seriously. I know that because if you really take your life seriously, you will not want to ask from advice from just any kind of person. If you, I remember one day I went to shave my head, and the guy did such a terrible job. I did comment that the guy missed his profession. He was supposed to be a butcher and not a barber, because he wounded me quite much. And I thought in my mind that I should ask him that, look, were you a butcher before you decided to switch professions and become a barber? Actually, I think the guy was an anti-barber. He makes things worse. If you want to, if you value your hair, you don't want to go to someone that will destroy your hair. If you value your life, if you value your health, you want to make sure that you have a skilled doctor deal on your problems. So if you want advice, you just don't want to go to any kind of person. You want to know that the person you're getting advice from understands what is at stake, understands that it's your life that is at stake, and they will not just tell you anything that comes to their head and just feel so high and mighty and just pump out anything. I mean, it's your life. You don't have another life. You don't have a spare life. And so I said that it's a job that I'm not comfortable with because it's such a huge responsibility, and it's one that I would prefer not to take if I had the choice not to always take it. And there are many cases I refuse to do that, and there are cases I really take that responsibility for someone that I deeply care about. And so the only reason I'm able to do this job is because I have availed myself. I've poured tremendous, and it's something I still do, tremendous amount of energy, time, and resources, a lot of money to study and understand spiritual permanent principles. And that is why I can look at two people that are planning to get married, and I can almost tell that it will not work. Or if it has to work, this or this has to be done. I could, and then all those things, I could tell all those things, not because I may or may not have some prophetic ability to see things, but the wisdom that I've acquired by the grace of God and by the help of God enables me to see a seed and see the future of that seed, to see someone's behavior at the age of 16, 15, 24, to see the behavior of a young man's fiance, or to see the behavior of a young lady's fiance. And I could tell how this guy will behave when they get married, and how she will behave when they get married. And I could predict this future behavior. And for the most part, how I'm able to interpret dreams for most people is as a result of this understanding. And so uh, that is why King David is saying in Psalms 111, the very last verse, that he is not saying that we are supposed to believe in God. That's not really what he is saying. There are a lot of people who believe in God, who claim to fear God, but they are very foolish and they have no wisdom. What King David is saying is that we are supposed to understand how the world works so clearly that we actually see God, that God becomes so clear. That's a whole different thing altogether, isn't it? You see, I mentioned in the teaching I said where I taught about fools, different kinds of fools and wisdom and stuff. And I have a whole teaching about the fear of God. How is it that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom? I have a whole teaching on that. And you might want to avail yourself to that teaching. If you want it, tell me, I'll give it to you. On that. And so what it is I'm trying to say here is that you come to that understanding of how the world works so clearly that now you see God. And that is how Abraham found God in a world where everyone was mostly polytheistic. That's how Abraham found the one true God. He began to observe things, look at the world, ask the right questions with all honesty and open mindedness, and then it became clear that it is God. And when he had that realization, and then God spoke to him. It's a whole very interesting story about that happened, how Abraham, with the questions he was asking, and how he got to that realization. And most founders of all different religions, Confucius and so on, these were people who asked questions, and the questions led them to realizations and so on, and discovery of God. And so this is very important, you see, and obviously that is not the vision that the academia and the celebrities, or the celebrities of YouTube and Facebook and all the other channels, and the people want you to get. And you find that a lot of people who buy their philosophies don't have the successful lives in the real terms of it, in terms of finances, family, relationship wise. They are not. that successful. You see, because success in these areas mostly come as a result of understanding, having a clear understanding about how the world works, specifically spiritual principle. Now, so how are you going to judge what a a teacher is? Now, how are you going to judge? Like I promised you that if you understand the permanent principles in those three areas I mentioned, you will have a good life. You will have a good life. There's no reason to listen to me if you act out that understanding and your life does not begin to significantly improve in meaning, in satisfaction. There's no reason to continue listening to me. Now imagine that there was a school dedicated to study the teachings of the German philosopher Nietzsche, or the thought processes, the logical processes of the Russian writer Dostoevsky, and you want to understand the impact, the benefit of their philosophy or of their logical process on their students. How I would do that is to simply look at the kind of lives that the students who adhere to that system of thought are living. And that's what I would do. Recently, I was driving with a friend around an area in Douala, and we saw a Kingdom Hall Jehovah Witness, a very beautiful structure. We passed there a couple of years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago. The building was not there, so I noticed it. It was quite conspicuous. And I said, "Oh, this building is they just built it." Then he told me a fascinating story, testimony about how the Jehovah Witnesses got that land and about how it built. It's quite a beautiful structure, sophisticated. It's their headquarters in Cameroon. And then the conversation continued, and now we began to talk about something about the theology, and he said something about what the Jehovah Witnesses believe. I said, "Oh, okay, I didn't know that." And then I said, "But I don't really care though that they believe that. I don't care really what they believe." And then he reminded me of a post that I posted in Facebook maybe 1 or 2 years ago. And I said, if I had a choice to choose my neighbors, and I had a choice between Jehovah Witnesses and people from the Latter Day Church, Saints Church of Christ, and maybe any other religion you could choose, maybe Ramallah in Palestine or any other sect or religious sect. And I said I couldn't care less what the Jehovah Witnesses believe. I couldn't care less what the Latter Day Saints Church of Christ believe. And I couldn't care less what anyone claims they believe. What I want, I will judge them based on their actions, based on the majority of their actions. And based on the actions and behavior in that post, I concluded that the people that I would really want to have as my neighbors, I want to have Jehovah Witnesses as my neighbors. I want to have people from the Latter Day Church of Christ as my neighbors, as long as they're not trying to convert me to anything and knocking my door any moment to preach to me, will be do just fine. Because what you say you believe really means nothing. Who knows? Who really knows what they believe? The human being is so complicated. You, as a human being, you're so complicated that the closest you can come to truly knowing what you truly, really believe is how you act and behave. People say this thing casually all the time. It says, action speaks louder than words. In other words, actions tell the truth louder than words. Don't mind what people say they believe. I remember back then in my Protestant days, and when we had a confirmation, and we were told we had to recite in front of the church our statements of belief. I believe in this, I believe in that. And there's a folly in that, because who really knows what you believe? You are not a master of yourself, and neither are you a slave of yourself. I tried to explain this in previous teachings. You cannot just will and command yourself to do as you wish. You have a nature with a lot of proclivities, likes and dislikes, habits, and so on, and people you are more flow into it and coherent with, and people you don't flow so well with. You have all these different aspects of yourself, and you cannot just will yourself out of one. I know that you might be someone that has an iron will, that can decide to like certain things you don't like and hate certain things you'd like, but you pay a price. It will come at a price. And this is a profound thing I just said, that you're not your own master, neither are you your own slave. It seems that we human beings, we are in the midst of very powerful forces, very powerful, intricate forces that governs our lives, very powerful laws that we are subjected to these laws, and how we navigate within these laws will determine whether we have chaos or we have order, whether we have curses or we have blessings. And so do you really know yourself? You don't know yourself. I know there's a popular song out there says, I know who I am. There's a huge fallacy in the song, because the more you truly understand human nature and how complicated it is, how complicated consciousness and the degree of mindfulness, that your conscious mind, the things you know in your head consciously, it's only a minuscule percentage, a tiny percent of what the reality of what you truly are and truly know. So the closest you can come to knowing who you truly are is watching how you act and behave. Watch out the things you like, don't like. And it's like a self-auditing process. You look at things you like, people you don't like, people you flow with, people you don't flow with, people you feel comfortable around, people you don't feel comfortable around, the things that you have knee-jerk reactions to, and you try to understand why. That is the closest you can come to knowing who you truly are and knowing what you truly believe. Now, I have a book that can help you with that kind of self-auditing process. My book, The Wisdom Key. If you want it, let me know. I get it to you. If you cannot afford it, I give it to you for free. That's fine. So for you to stand and say boldly and confidently, I am this, I cannot do this, I'm a free person. uh, I had someone said to me not so long ago that I have a mind, I mean proudly and boldly, that I have a mind on my own, of my own. And I laughed, not condescendingly or to shame them. It's quite friendly, and there was a lot of goodwill in the conversation. And I laughed and I said, you have no bloody idea what it means to have a mind of your own. And I know for a fact that you don't have a mind of your own. And I can prove it to you that you don't have a mind of your own. You're not even close. You've not even begun the journey towards having a mind of your own. And I said to the person that what you have is a lot of opinions, and you have a lot of biased and a lot of idiosyncratic. What was the word I used for that? There was a simpler word that I used to explain to the person what I thought the person really had. Anyway, that is not important. What I'm trying to say here is that we human beings, we are prone than any other creature. We are prone to self-deception, very highly prone to self-deception. And even people who are highly enlightened, people who are highly educated, they tend to have blind spots. And I have blind spots, and that is why you never come to the end of studying. You the last thing you want to do is to reach that worst place of mental arrogance, where you think that you know all there is to know about, or what you know about a certain subject is all there is to know about that subject. Therefore, your conclusions and your assumptions on that subject is absolute and immutable. No one can change your mind. You have a mind of your own. Your mind is made up, and no one can change your mind. That is the worst state to be in. It's a state of great folly and mental arrogance. You want to always be at a position that someone else that you might be talking with could know something about a subject that you don't know, and what they know, if you know it, could make a whole lot of difference about how you understand and approach that subject. Okay, so uh, I think I pursued that rabbit trail there and I almost lost the direction I was going. Now, we're supposed to end this lecture now, about 4 minutes ago, but let me see if I could take it to 1 hour 30 minutes so I could bring this baby close to landing, and and let's see how that works. Okay, so uh, so whereas where, so we're talking about judging worldviews, and that you judge worldviews by the results, the actionable results it produces. You want to understand yourself and know what you truly are. You watch how you act. Okay, you watch how you behave, because we human beings, we have emotions, we have emotional biases, we have things that we instinctively and naturally want, and we are prone to self-deception, the ability to bend reality with our minds. And there's something also called confirmation bias. Means I want something to be a certain way for certain emotional reasons, some of which I understand, some of which I don't understand, and for very complicated reasons. Some of them might have to do with my upbringing, some of them might have to do with my insecurities and my fears, some of them might have to do with my hates, my likes, and my dislikes. It might have to do with a nebulous subconscious web of complex emotions and desires that have made me to want certain things to be a certain way. And then I come up without a priori determination that this is how I want the world to be. And I begin to find facts and knowledge to confirm for me that the world is truly how I want it to be. And then I find what I'm looking for, and I deceive myself in this kind of way, and I bend reality with my mind, and I find the thoughts that will confirm everything I want, and I see the world, everything I want, and to confirm the way I want to see the world, and to make me believe that the world is actually that way, and so on. So we are prone to that. Every one of us, we are very prone and susceptible to that. And it's something that, if by default, if you don't work against it, if you don't train yourself not to fall prey to that, and we all have areas that we are prey to. And like I mentioned, that the journey of study to enlightenment never ends, because you have blind spots, and every day you want to have people who help you see those blind spots. You want to have people who help you see your own bias, who help you see your own areas of darkness, because believe me, there are so many, and it will take you a lifetime, and even your last day in this world, there's still that potential, that opportunity to discover one more blind spot, one more thing that you thought you knew, that you thought you understood, but you really did not understand or know. So you judge a system of belief, you judge a worldview, you judge a teacher, you judge a philosophy by the kind of life the devotees of that system produce. Okay, and so in the same way, I think that a very reliable way to judge a worldview, to judge a blueprint, a worldview, which is a fancy word for philosophy, and philosophy itself is a fancy word. We might discuss that in a lecture. It's on the basis of the lifestyle, the people who adhere to that worldview. You know, and like I said, beware of taking seriously people when they say, I believe this, I believe that. If I were you, I don't take any of that seriously. I just watch how they act. Then I have a fair idea of what they believe, what is truly going on within them, even beneath their conscious mind. And they might argue with me. I might tell them that this is what is going on with you, and they might argue me and pouring out all the things that are in their conscious mind. But the truth is, who knows, who really can boldly say, any person who can stand and really boldly say that I know that I believe this, I truly know myself. You don't want to ever listen to that person, any word that that person has to say, because they have been so self-deluded, they don't really understand. So people might be possessed with ideas, and ideas is a very interesting thing, because ideas are not knowledge, ideas is not facts, ideas are not just thoughts. Ideas are powerful things, ideas are powerful spiritual things. It's a powerful spiritual force, and people could be possessed with ideas, and the ideas have them, and as a result they have become avatars for those ideas, and as a result of that they are acting out the will, or should I say acting out the will. They've become mouthpieces of those ideas, but not the personification in terms of the life of the idea. Now, oh God, I think I'm becoming geeky here. Now, let me come back to simple terms and let me try to speak in a very simple and plain terms. Okay, so you judge a worldview, you judge a philosophy on the basis of the lifestyle, you see, of those who would pursue that worldview. Now, uh, in the previous teaching, I mentioned that we have scripture on one side. This is the part where I'm supposed to give you one spiritual principle, permanent principle, and then we talk about it and I give you how it applies, just like we did for that permanent physical principle. Now, as I had planned this lecture in my mind, I had drawn the map of the lecture of this teaching in my mind. This was the point where I envisioned that I was going to be telling you about a permanent spiritual principle, and just like I did with the permanent physical principle that we explored an hour ago, we were going to now, I will give you examples of how it applies in different aspects of life and answers different questions in different aspects of life. But we are 1 hour 10 minutes gone, and if we start that part, it's going to take me at least 30 minutes, 30 45 minutes to sufficiently explain that. And so we don't want to start that today. So let me conclude on something else. Okay, let me conclude on something that I think you would enjoy. So last teaching I spoke about scripture and science, that, and I also spoke about it in the blueprint to redemption and transcendence, that uh, science deals with the physical and the natural, and religion or spiritual knowledge or wisdom deals with the spiritual. And I try to tell you the difference between things that are spiritual and things that are physical, and that physical problems really you would use the knowledge of science, and spiritual problems would require a spiritual knowledge and understanding, which in this case scripture, or depending from whichever religious background you come from. Now, I said something before I continue. I said something that I think I should clarify earlier ago. I said that you're not your own master, neither are you your own slave. It seems that we are caught up in within very powerful forces that run our lives, and the best we can do is like a ship on an ocean, is to learn to navigate and bring that ship to shore, and to not just any shore, not to the shore of a barren desert, but to a shore of abundant life. And that almost reeks of fatalism, but it doesn't. Now there's just a lot of caveats around that. You know, it is not the human beings. Now there's a lot of debate about whether human beings have free will or not, and there is evidence for both sides. It is not self-evident that human beings have free will. There's evidence to prove, a lot of evidence to prove, and that human beings do not have free will. And there's also a lot of evidence to prove that human beings have free will. And what some very brilliant thinkers in the field have said is that it seems as if you act as though you have free will, you would have results that seemingly actually prove that you do have free will. But if you act in life as though you don't have free will, you also validate and prove the a priori position that free will doesn't exist. Human beings don't have free will. So the person who is acting as if he has free will ends up bringing forward evidence. Their actions becomes proof and evidence to the fact. Their actions produce results that prove and give evidence that human beings have free will. And if someone start acting as though they don't have free will, their actions give evidence and proof to the fact that to give evidence and proof that there is no human beings do not have free will. And there's a lot of scientific studies that seem to suggest that human beings don't have free will. This is what I would tell you on the subject, that free will, human beings do not have free will intrinsically. The free will is one of those things that one cultivates. It is, yes, you can inherit from your parents depending on the kind of life your parents live. You can or inherit through genetic habits and behavior, inherited behaviors and habits. But free will is not something you have intrinsically. It's something you can lose. There's a poem I read a while ago, and the writer of the poem, there's a lady, and now it's talking about, was it a poem or was something I imagined? However, this is going to make sense anyway. It's going to explain what I want to say. Now, imagine a lady that you know the story. You cannot live with her. You cannot live without her. And then you, was it a poem? Anyway, so uh, you asked a lady out or asked to marry her, whatever you asked from her, and she said yes. But the problem is that she said yes to everybody else that she's ever known, that has ever asked her for that stuff you're asking from her. And so she said yes, but you don't feel satisfied as you thought you would when she said yes. Because she said yes to so many people, and you don't, her yes now doesn't mean anything. It's like, how am I to know the value of your yes when you say it to everybody and anybody? Maybe your yes will mean more if you actually have said no to a whole lot of people, and then you said yes to me, and then I now see the value of your yes. In other words, if you don't learn to say no when you're supposed to say no, then you have a problem. You see, you have a problem that when you're supposed to say yes, you're going to have a problem of free will. In other words, free will is something you train. It could become stronger, it could become weak, and you could ultimately lose it. And it's like addiction. The people who are under the power of addiction have literally lost their free will, their freedom to act. So they are now under the sway of the powerful force of their desire, impulsive, and they cannot choose. They have been broken to only one choice: to want and to satisfy that want. And if you're raising kids, you want to train them to have free will. You want to have to teach them to say no when they have to say no, so that they will say yes when it's right to say yes, and that yes will mean something. Okay. And so now I wanted to clarify that we might talk about that when we might do a teaching series on thoughts, what ideas are, and then we might want to talk about the power of free will, self-awareness, and self-understanding, where I get to really explain to you some of these very statements that might sound outrageous. Who really knows yourself? When I say things like who really knows what they believe, that the closest you can come to knowing what you truly believe and who you are is how you act, the things you like, the things you pursue in life, your hierarchy of values and morals, how you act them out in the world, not what you say with your mouth. That's the closest you can come to knowing who you are and what you believe. Anyway, let me continue. I said that, so you don't want to try to solve spiritual problems using scientific knowledge, and which will not work, by the way, or which might seem to work, but in the long term you see that that was just a band-aid solution. And neither do you want to try to solve spiritual problems with science. And we'll talk more about the difference between the two. Now, I want to tell you a story, and it's been so long, I haven't thought of this story, so I'm not sure I will do justice in really explaining the story. There were missionary doctors that came to Africa, I think it was Zimbabwe, and they were trying to teach these Zimbabweans about disease, medicine, doctors, trying to teach them, this group of team, a team, they're trying to teach them medicine, how to treat common bacteria infection and the different kind of bacteria that are responsible for different things, typhoid and all those cholera and all those different kinds of things. So, and to teach them about the bacteria, that the bacteria, this one is caused by this bacteria and this is the treatment for that, and so on. So the people were impressed, and after they finished learning, and true story actually, they told this white doctor that, okay, now you've taught us the white man way of treating medicine and of treating illnesses and what causes diseases and so on, so would you like to learn the African way? And the doctor said, yeah, she was curious to know what it was. And the African perspective for those people actually believed that all diseases were caused by spirits. There was a spirit responsible for this disease and spirit responsible for that one, that one, that one. So where the white man, the white doctor is talking about a bacteria, the African was talking about a spirit, a particular kind of spirit that causes it. And there was a ritual for exorcism to remove that spirit that causes that disease, while the white man will be trying to destroy the bacteria. And the thing is that both of them had results. The African method worked just as good as the white method. Now, now this is the problem. Who is correct? Now, I asked in the previous teaching that is is sickness caused by demons, or is it caused by all these other things that has been discovered by the medical world? Do you need faith when you're sick, or do you need a doctor? Do you need a faith healer, or do you need a doctor? Do you need prayer, or do you need medicine? Is it caused by a bacteria, or is it caused by a demon? You see, and there are a lot of diseases, and so that is why a lot of scientifically minded people look at the Bible and say the Bible is just a primitive myth for people who do not yet understand the cause, what causes offending feet, what causes epilepsy, what causes leprosy, and what causes scabies, and all those other things. And so, because of their scientific ignorance, these people attributed these things to spirits and to demons. But now that we now know what causes these things for real, then we can discard away with the old books of myth and primitive understanding of the world. And now we are the enlightened people who know what is really happening. So we don't need the Bible anymore. But like I said, that is a fatal error, because that is not what the Bible is meant to explain. Let me give you another example that might really bring this distinction to your mind clearer. And we're going to do a better job at making that distinction clearer, the difference between the Bible. As I said, the two knowledge don't serve the same master. Uh, Science describes why religion or scripture or spiritual knowledge explains. Now it seems like I'm doing double speak here, but or just doing a semantic word play of words, or word game. But no, this is it. Let me try to explain. Moses, when he saw the burning bush, now, and the bush was burning, there were flames, but the bush was not being consumed. And so now imagine this is Moses, a spiritually minded person. He goes to the bush, and let's say there's a counterpart that he goes with. This is a scientist. Now the scientist engages in a study to understand how it is that the bush is there's fire, there's flames, but the bush is not being converted into carbon and air and ashes, in other words, being consumed, burning. And the scientists might eventually come up with an explanation that is true and correct about that phenomena, and might actually be able to explain that phenomena in scientific terms. Now, and he tells Moses that, well, Moses, you should stop being mystified by this. It's just simple science. And he explains the science behind it, and how that is possible. And he seems to have solved the mystery and taken the mystery out of it. So Moses, there's no presence of God here. There's nothing happening. There's nothing to see here. Let's go back. It's just one scientific phenomenon. This is not a miracle of any kind. And like I've said, that miracles are not, you cannot define a miracle as things that cannot be explained. That's not what a miracle is. We said that in the blueprint to transcendence. Maybe we'll talk about this again later in the other lectures, other teachings. But what the scientists will not be able to answer is this: the scientists will not be able to tell why that thing is happening. He might be able to tell from a scientific perspective that maybe it's because there's air pressure and there's this that happened and so on, but he will not be able to tell the purpose and the meaning of that event at a particular time, assuming that we live in a world that events are not random, that things just don't happen for nothing, that there's a reason. And like I said, in the Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, there's no word for coincidence. There's no such thing as coincidence in God's world. Random things do not happen. Everything happens for a reason. There's a reason why things happen the way they happen at a particular time. So the scientists will not be able to tell the purpose and the meaning for that event at a particular time, why it is happening at that time in life. And the purpose and the meaning of that event was that God wanted to speak to Moses, to get Moses' attention, to speak to him. That's the purpose and the meaning of that event. Regardless of whether you can explain how it is happening scientifically, the purpose and the meaning is spiritual. It has to do with a spiritual understanding to know why that stuff is happening at the time. So, is it bacteria, or is it a spirit that causes disease? You see, uh, I think I should leave you with that question to ponder. Is it possible that both the African and that missionary, both of them are right? Is it possible that both of them are right and are correct? And is it possible that both of them, like like two legs in the body, both of them need to work together? It's not one or the other, and one is not complete without the other. The scientist, Moses needs the scientist, as well as the scientist needs Moses. The African needs to understand the bacteria and all that stuff and how it works, and how to treat it. And the white doctor needs to understand the spiritual dimension of disease and everything behind it. How is it possible? Maybe the new frontier is that we finally discover where these two things fit, and marry them together, and then now finally find that wholeness. And finally, these two friends, these people that were supposed to be two best friends, they stop fighting and they come together and work together. Maybe that is going to produce greater reality in the world, greater prosperity in the world than we've ever imagined possible. But let's not think about the world at the moment. Let's think about you and me, about your life and my life. You see, there are problems in your life that you can explain physically why that problem is happening. I did this, I made a blunt choice, and all that stuff, and acted like this and like this and like this, and I created these problems for myself. There might also be a spiritual explanation why that is happening. And sometimes spiritual problems, the spiritual explanation deals with the root cause of the problem. It's just like, say, you have a disease and there are the symptoms of the disease. Most of the times, physical problems are symptoms of real spiritual problems. Means the fact that you got infected with a bacteria. The There's something in epigenetics. I wanted to say something about epigenetics that is very interesting, that might be very, very interesting for you to understand, and how these things work. That uh, the state of the body, there's a state in which if your body is at that state, the chemical balance of your body is well balanced, the magnetic energy of your body is balanced, everything is functioning at its optimum. Do you know the amount of viruses and bacteria that is in the air? The amount of viruses and bacteria that you ingest on a daily basis. But you don't get sick or die because your body destroys these things. And this is what I'm trying to say, that you would have a more bigger life, a better life, if you can see these two dimensions of your life, and you can see where these two bodies of knowledge fit in your life and how to use them and manage them properly without hurting yourself, without getting into one extreme, without becoming overly spiritual and disregard science, and without becoming overly scientific and disregard the spiritual. Adonai bless you and keep you. Adonai make his face to shine on you and be gracious to you. Adonai look kindly on you and give you his shalom. I bless you and I bless your week. Be fruitful throughout this week. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. No disease that comes against you would succeed and prevail. You will live a life of fruitfulness and prosperity this week. And everything the things that you've been trying to accomplish throughout this year, and you've worked so hard at them. But this week, that one touch, that one move, that one new adjustment will open the door and open the floodgates of blessings and favor and success for you. You will see things clearly. Your eyes open and you see clearly, and you will walk into new opportunities and to new territories. I bless you with all this in the name of our Master Yeshua. See you next week, my friends. We're going to pick up from here, and in this teaching today ended halfway. The thought, I have not landed with the thought that I wanted to share with you today, so we're going to pick up directly from here next week. Please do get back to me with feedback, and do share this teaching with anyone that you know that might find value from it. And see you next week. Bye for now. Shalom.